So, okay, cool. So I'll share my screen and we can get into it. Okay, and everyone can see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Cool. All right, so we're going to be talking about APIs. Last session, we worked a little bit with the GitHub API, and this time we're starting a whole new project, just specifically focused on getting data from an API of your choice. They give us a couple options. And so I prepared some slides, and we'll just talk about kind of what is an API and the kind of basic concepts that are going to help us with working with APIs. So let's just get into it. So what is an API? An API, there's a lot of different terms, and you've heard of like the fetch API. This definition that we're talking about today is going to be, we're talking about a server. So it's some computer out there in the world that's set up to be able to receive requests and respond to them. And that's called a server. And we can access these APIs using a URL. And usually they're connected to a database. So like the GitHub API and the API we're going to use today for this lesson, most of the time it's a server that's connected to a database, and I'll show you a little model of what that would look like. So generally, you would have a front end, and in our case, it's a web app or a website. Basically means the same thing. And our app is talking to a server. And then the server is talking to a database. And so the front end is the web app or the website. It could also be an app on your phone or your, I don't know, gaming console or something. The back end is a computer in a data warehouse, and it's a server. And that's what the actual API is it's a program running on one of these computers. And we can access, send requests to that computer using URLs, and it'll respond with some sort of data. So when I first started learning about APIs and stuff, this video was super helpful for me. And so you can take a note of it. It's in my slides. And so if you want, you can, my slides are on Slack. So you can go and check this out. It's a really long video, but this guy just does a really good job of explaining kind of how all this stuff works. And so if you want to do more of like a deep dive into it, that's a good video I'd recommend. So now let's talk about how to use an API. And really, unfortunately, it depends. There's no like really strict set of rules that I can really lay out that tells you how to work with it. But we're going to talk about some of the strategies here. So the first thing is every API is going to have a website pretty much. And that website's going to have an API documentation. And that's basically just a part of their website that's a guide on how to use their API. Documentation, also called docs. So you'll sometimes see the word docs. So today we're going to be working with the CAT API. CAT API, cats as a service. So it's an API all about cats, and we can get images of cats and information about different breeds and stuff. And so this is just a server. It's an API that someone set up in the world that we can use in our app if we want. And so this is one of the ones listed as an option for us for this assignment. And so you would go to one of these websites and then click read our guides or documentation in this case. You'll see different kinds of buttons, but generally it'll be pretty obvious how to get to the documentation. And so when you first start looking at the docs for for an API, it can be kind of overwhelming. There's going to be some, it was built for developers. It wasn't built for kind of the general public necessarily to be able to read. And so there's going to be a lot of like technical jargon, and it can just be a little bit overwhelming and confusing based on the website and how they have it set up. In this case, the guide doesn't really give you that much information that's like easily understandable. So I'm going to break down kind of how to make sense of this stuff. So the fundamental things for interacting with an API are we need to know about URLs. We need to know about HTTP, requests and responses, and API keys. Sometimes we don't always need them, but in the cat API we do. And parsing responses. So that means when we get the response back from the API using fetch, how do we kind of take that big blob of data that we got back from this API and like make something useful out of it? How do we get to the information that we want? So we're going to start with talking about URLs. URLs are not just gibberish. You've seen URLs a bunch. That's when you're on a website, that's what's in the search bar on the top. If you hear someone say www.something.com, that's the URL. And you probably have seen there's a familiar part of an API. The www is probably familiar. You might see google.com or youtube.com. That is called the domain. And let's see, there's different parts of URL. That part is called the like top level domain, which is a pretty recognizable part. But then there's all this stuff that you might see at the end of a URL and throughout it that is kind of confusing. And it actually all has a meaning. And it basically is like the key to using APIs and just using the internet in general in code. So URLs are how we communicate with servers. And on this cat API documentation, this is the first thing they say. Quick start with this API. You can click on this link to get a random image. And this is a URL. And you can click on this other link to get 10 random images. So this is their guide. Their guide is in the form of just some URLs at the very start. So now we need to talk a little bit about, what is a URL and what are the different parts of it. So the key thing is that different URLs result in different data. So if I click on this top URL here, and it's being cut off a little bit in this image, but it's https://api.thecatapi.com/v1/images/search. When I click on that link, it will display this, which is some JSON data. So this is information in the form of a JavaScript object. So it's JSON. If I click on this other link that they provide, it's slightly different. So up until this images/search part, it's all the same, but then this bottom one has a question mark, and then it says limit equals 10. And so that's the difference in this URL, and then we're getting some different data. We're actually getting 10 results back from the API, rather than this one where we just get one. And so, and these, what these results are, and we'll get to it, but these are actually, it's an array with objects in it, and each object represents a cat. And it doesn't really tell us anything about the cat because we're not using an API key yet. It only gives us the ID of the cat, the URL of the image. So this we could put into a source or the source of an HTML image tag, and it would display the image on our web page. That's the information we're getting. And I might as well just pull it up. So I'll go to the cat API, go to read our guides. And then this is what we were looking at right here. Quick start, click on this link to get a random image. So I can click on that and it'll pull up this. And it'll look a little bit different on your computer. I have an extension in Chrome called JSON Lite, and it formats this response back as JSON data. It like makes it look good. It makes it formatted. If I didn't have that extension, I can show you what it would look like. I'll just turn it off and then reload this page. That's what it'll probably look like for you. It's the same information, it's printed on one line and it doesn't have the colors and syntax highlighting and stuff. And you might, yeah, I think you can press pretty print and it'll show it differently. But this actually is the information we want from this API. It has this URL here, and if I were to paste that URL into my, or for the image, if I were to paste that into my browser, so I copied that, if I were to paste it up here, it would show me a cat image. So that's what this API does. It gives us cat images, or it gives us the URL of the image. And then with that URL, we can just put it into our browser to preview it, or we can put it into an image tag. Anyways, that's what we're getting back. We're getting JSON data. And I'll turn this extension back on because I like it. Makes it look nice. You can fold them. Okay. So let's talk about the structure of a URL really quick. I don't want to go too in depth about it. It's not, it's something that you can spend a while learning on. I just want to talk about the important parts. This beginning part is the protocol, HTTPS, which is the language. It's like the language that the internet uses. This is the subdomain, so that could be like Google or YouTube or something. Or actually, there's sometimes a subdomain, there's sometimes just the domain. So the domain would be like Google or YouTube. The subdomain would be a part of that, like blog or, if you have a website, but you have different parts of your website, that's the subdomain. The path is different pages usually, or in like the case of a website, but with an API, the path would be generally like a different item that you want to get back. So like if it was the cats API, you might be able to do /breeds and get a list of breeds, or you might be able to do I think they even have dogs on the cat API. So you could do /dogs and get dogs. So these slashes are basically at the end here. These are the path, which kind of differentiate between what the resources that you want. And actually, the URL is an acronym. It stands for Universal Resource Locator. And you can think of the whatever you get back when you use a URL, whatever you receive, that is a resource. So resource is just kind of like a general term for anything that, like any sort of data that you can get. And the URL is what you use to get that data. And sometimes the data is in the form of a website. Sometimes it's in the form of JSON. And so an API will give you JSON, whereas like a website URL will give you the actual website. The query string, this definitely will like come into play when you're using an API. You'll see a question mark and then a key and then a value. So here we have question mark post equals TensorFlow, which that's like TensorFlow is like a link, or it's a library for Python. So this would be like a key, and then the value, you can specify some sort of kind of parameter. And so as you can see here, we have in our cat API, we have search question mark limit 10. So the question mark says, I'm about to ask for, or I'm about to use a query parameter. The key is limit, and then the value that we put in is 10. And so each API will have, well, every API is going to be a little different, but some of them will include an opportunity for us to change what we get back based on the query parameters. So here I'm saying I want 10 cats back. And if I were to change that 10, and I could actually show you in my browser, if I click on that URL, which is right here, and I get 10 cats. If I were to change this 10 here in my URL to like 3, oh, didn't work. I actually tested this earlier. I think it's because I don't have my API key set up, which we'll get to. But normally you could think it would limit this to 3. They limit you, and you need what's called an API key, which we'll get to in the slides. So sorry, that demo right there didn't work, but that is what kind of, that's the basics of a URL. The very end, we have fragments. That would be a part of your web page. So if you have different sections, like on your portfolio, and you click on the navigation link to go to a certain section in your website, it'll generally put a hashtag and then the name of the like part of your website. That doesn't really, you don't have to worry about that part with API URLs usually. So endpoints, this is another term you'll see, and basically the URL is basically the identifier we're using to get to a certain endpoint. And so the endpoint is the like part of the server that has the information we want. And so the API defines certain endpoints that we can use. And you don't really need to know the term endpoint right now, but you'll see that sometimes in reference to like the different things you can access with an API. They'll be called different endpoints. And so the endpoint would generally be the end part of the URL here. That's how you specify which endpoint you want. So here we want images/search on the cat API. And so if we were to talk about the different parts of this URL and how they relate to endpoints, we might say this URL accesses the images/search endpoint in version 1 of the cat API. And it's version 1 because we can see this v1/v1. Sometimes APIs, usually they'll have a version. And yeah. The convention around how URLs are structured, there's a few different ways that people can do it, but the most common convention is called REST. And it stands for, what is it? Representational state transfer, I think, which you don't really need to know. Basically, it's just the most common way of structuring your API. And it makes it kind of so that once you learn how to use one API, there'll be a lot of similarities between how to change your URL depending on on different APIs, depending on what you want. So here we can see, here's an example of, this is just a sample, like an example that I put in here. Say we had a bookstore API. You might say this is the like root or the base URL, and then these are different endpoints. So you could have slash authors. And so you could put slash authors at the end of this base URL to get the authors. If you say slash books, it would mean get the books. And these are all kind of conventions defined with REST. So slash authors slash one, that would be, according to REST, usually you'd have a resource, and then you could also access a resource like a specific ID. So it could be authors one, which would mean get the author whose ID is one, or books. And then this is another query string. So author equals Suzanne plus Collins. That means get all books whose author is Suzanne Collins. And you don't need to be writing these from scratch right now. Generally, the API guide will kind of give you some indication of like what the different endpoints are and how you can change them. But it's good to know kind of what's actually going on. The way to get the data you want and the way to interact with an API is by understanding the URLs, changing the URL and how you can get different data based on that URL. And the API guides will usually kind of explain, it'll like give you example URLs. It'll make it, depending on the API, but it'll generally make it easier so you don't have to like fully be like writing out your URLs by script or from scratch. So the next concept is HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And this is basically the language that the whole web works on. And URLs are actually part of HTTP. Fetch uses HTTP. So when we do a fetch request in JavaScript, we're getting back an HTTP response. We're sending out an HTTP request and getting back an HTTP response. And so it's basically just the language that all these computers use to interact with each other over the internet. It's made up of requests and responses, and then URLs are part of HTTP. So HTTP, this like specification of how like computers can interact with each other, URLs are part of that specification. And you've actually been using HTTP all along. So every URL starts with HTTP or HTTPS, or for the most part, they generally start with that because you're communicating in that specific way. That's how web browsers interact with other computers by default. And HTTPS, there's an S at the end, that stands for secure. So there's HTTP, and then if most websites will use HTTPS, which is the secure version. So it like encodes your information so that it's not easily intercepted. It's like a security thing. This is what an HTTP request looks like in like your console. You have your URL. There's different methods. So there's get, post, delete, patch. These are different methods so that you can say, I want to get a web page or get some data, or I want to send some data to the server. The get request method, or the different request methods are ways of specifying what action you want to take. And then there's status codes, which are an important part of HTTP. Status codes are part of the response. So the URL is part of your request. The request method, that's part of your request. And then the status code is part of the response. So here we're saying, go to the server at this domain, youtube.com. I want to get data. And the server responded with 200, which means okay. And there's all these HTTP status codes. There's 100 level status codes, 200s, 300s, 400s, and 500s. And they each have different meanings. But anything that's in the 200 level is good. That means the server responded and said, yes, we're happy with that request. And a common one you'll see, let's see, I think I get to it, but you'll see 404 error sometimes. And that means the URL doesn't exist, or like the resource you're trying to access doesn't exist on the server. So HTTP requests. Requests are what you use to interact with these APIs. And so when you're using fetch, you're making an HTTP request. They contain a URL, which you've already, when you're interacting with the GitHub API, you pass in a URL into fetch, and that's the first parameter inside fetch. You pass in a URL. And then the other parameters, or the other stuff you can specify down here that you're seeing, this stuff is if you want to do either a different type of request or specify something else, like send a body. But the URL is the most important part. Then there's the method, which the method you can specify like this. It can be post, get, put, delete, etc. You can specify a header. Generally, the only thing that you need to know for now is that the header can specify the type of content that you want to get back. So here I'm saying I want the content type to be application/JSON. That is how you specify in the fetch API. That's how you specify I want JSON data from the server or from the API. And then you can send a body in your request, and the body needs to be in JSON format usually. Or actually, I think in our header right here, since we're sending a post request, we're telling the server we are sending application, we're sending JSON data. And the JSON data we're sending is in the body of the request. So it's a post request. So this is a request that's sending data out to the API, which we're not going to need to be sending data to the API. We're just going to be getting data from an API. Okay, browsers send GET requests. So every time you click on a link, enter a URL and press enter, or click load more, your browser is sending a GET request with a specific URL to a server out there in the world. And I can actually show you that if I go to my web browser. If I were to type in like google.com, and if I open the network tab, and let's see, it might, okay, I preserve logon. I think it'll keep the request around. So I type in google.com and I press enter. And you can see all of this stuff that just happened in my network tab. These are different requests and responses that my browser just made. And there's a lot because the internet ends up being more complicated in reality. But somewhere in here, there should be a GET request. And I might not be able to find it. I don't know. I can't find it right now. I don't know why. But there's that's how you that's how your browser is basically interacting with other computers over the internet is, and you can see it in this network tab, is anytime you go to a certain website, Wikipedia, your browser is sending all these different requests. It starts with just one, but then it leads into a bunch of others. But these are all HTTP requests, and I apologize because they look so crazy and messy, and I can't even find the one I'm looking for, but that's just how the internet is. It's messy. Okay.
Nampak ni ang baba na.
Okay. So your browser is sending GET requests to different URLs, and that's what enables you to search the web, go on different websites. And when you click on links and stuff, your browser is actually sending HTTP requests, getting responses, and loading up web pages for you. Responses can contain, okay, so we were just talking about requests. Now we're going to talk about responses. Requests are what you send from your app to the servers, to the APIs. Responses are what you get back. So the server will respond to your request, and this response is going to have the information that you want, hopefully. Responses can contain the body, status code, etc. These are the most important parts. And here is actually, I went to github.com and then I typed in this / and then a crazy random string of numbers. And that's not a valid route on github.com. And so their servers responded back with a 404 error and this web page that says 404, this is not the web page you were looking for. And so that's basically 404 is an HTTP status code that means the resource that you requested is not there. It doesn't exist. And that's just a common one you'll see. So here's an example of, this is the website that I'm going to be building in our demo today. Oh, I have there's like this animation thing on the image that is cutting it off. Sorry about that. So this is what we're going to be making. I have this button that fetches a random cat from the cat API. And you can see in our network tab, this is the information that has our request and response. And so this is the response that I'm getting back from the cat API. So API keys are important. Many APIs require keys. The key is basically a way of identifying that it's basically to prevent people from just randomly spamming someone's servers, because every API is actually a server that someone else is running and paying for to exist. And if you're overloading their servers with requests, then it can be a problem for them. And so they'll generally limit people unless they have an API key. And then even when you do have an API key, some servers will actually have you pay for each request. So like if you were to use like OpenAPI or OpenAI's API, and it's kind of a mouthful, but OpenAI is the company that makes ChatGPT. They have an API that you can use, but you have to pay money for each request you send. It's like a couple cents probably per request or less. But API keys are how these people who have these servers, these APIs, kind of keep track of which people are sending requests, and sometimes they don't allow you to even get a response unless you've created an API key. And with the cat API, they limit you a lot unless you have an API key. And so you have to In the case of the cat API, you just have to sign up with your email, just like you sign into any app. And they'll give you a key, and the key is just like a string of letters and numbers, like a password. And then you put that into your request. Once you have the key, you can include it in either the URL or the HTTP header in your fetch call. So there's slightly different ways that some APIs will want you to send your key over in a request. But generally it'll either be in the URL or in like the header of your fetch. And so in the case of the cat API, you can see this is their demo URL with an API key. It says, copy this link, add your own API key to get 10 Bengal images. So Bengal cats, the breed. So they have this URL. And then at the very end here, they have this ampersand and then API underscore key equals replace me. That is a query string. And the key is your API key. And then the value, replace me, you want to replace that text right there with the key that you get back when you sign up. And so I signed up for the cat API for free, got an email back that had my API key, and this is my API key, live underscore, and then this stuff. And I actually replaced this replace me text with my key that I got back. And then now the data that I get back from the cat API will be, they'll send back more data and I'll have more ability to do more stuff. So the basic idea, we just zoom out. We specify a URL and then send a fetch request to the API, and the fetch request sends us back data. The URL is what determines what data we're going to get back. API docs give us some guidance. They usually include example URLs, help you construct new URLs. They include playgrounds for viewing requests and responses, and help you obtain an API key if necessary. So they usually give you some guidance on how to get the URL working and stuff like that. What they don't do is they generally don't tell you how to parse the response that you get back. So this is an example of a response that I got back from the cat API, and it's just a bunch of stuff. It's messy. It looks like, we have data, it's information that's interesting. Like we have the name of this breed of cat, Oriental. We have the lifespan. We have child-friendly, dog-friendly with values, the description of the cat breed, and somewhere in there's like a URL with a cat picture. It's all this information, but we're going to need in our code, we're going to need to parse this information and get the actual data that we want out of it. And it can be kind of messy. And so I'll walk you through it. Here's some general guidance on how to parse the response that we get back. So this is an example. This is me fetching the cat API, but it's the same syntax as we did in last week, fetching from the Git API. We do a fetch at a URL, then we do .then, we get the response. We can console log the response. We don't have to. We check if the response is okay. If not, we throw an error. If the response is okay, then we return response.json, which is parsing it from JSON data into a JavaScript object. And then we do another .then. We get the data, which the data is the response.json. It's whatever we get back from that, which is the actual parsed JSON. So the data is the raw data we want from the API. And at this point, this data variable right here is going to be really, it's going to look like that. It's going to be this big mess of stuff. And so we need to figure out, what to do with that data. Okay, my slides walk a little bit through this. So this console log will look like this. it'll be your response with a body, and this is your HTTP response, right? And it has embedded JSON in the body. It has headers, it has OK, a couple other things. So that's our HTTP response. And then we convert it into a JavaScript object when we do res.json. And then at this point, we console log and it looks like this. So this is the body of the response. This is the actual data that we want from the API. And now at that point, we need to take that data and do something interesting with it. Image didn't load. It's fine. So we need to analyze this data that we get back and figure out what to do with it. I don't know why these images aren't loading. Try reloading. We're almost done with the lectures. About ready to write some code. Okay, so analyzing this data that we get back is essential for pulling out the properties that we want. So in this case, you can see I console log data, and then I saw data. In my console, you can see there's these square brackets on the outside, which means it's an array. And then there's curly brackets inside that, which means there's an object inside an array. And then there's the dot, dot, dot. And the dot, 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 that means there's more data in there that it's just not showing in the console, in the browser. And this like view of it, you'll see it represented differently in different browsers probably. But this is what it looks like in Chrome, at least for me. And you can like expand these using the little arrow there, and it will show you what's inside. So I expanded it once, which shows me what's inside the array. I expanded it again, which showed me what's at index 0 of the array. And then you can keep expanding it and see the different things. And so basically the response that you get back will generally be a series of nested objects and or arrays. And so we have to figure out how to drill into those objects and arrays to get the actual properties that we want. And so my response for doing that correctly is console log the data and then look at your whatever's coming out in your console and then figure out, is the data itself an array or an object? If it is, we need to use the proper accessors to get inside of it. If it's an array, we use the array index syntax, which is square brackets. If it's an object, we can use the dot syntax for accessing a property. And you can also take a screenshot if needed. So you can take a screenshot of the data as it comes back from the API and determine what form it's in, and then how we're going to get to the properties we want. Okay, covered a lot. Here's the conclusion. I'm just going to kind of reiterate all the things I said. So APIs are servers that you can interact with using code to retrieve or receive some data. APIs include documentation that can be confusing. Understanding a bit about URLs and REST conventions can help. URLs are used in fetch calls to retrieve some specified data. HTTP is the language we use for communication over the web. Our front-end website sends a request to the API, which is in the backend, and it returns a response. So it's about requests and responses. APIs sometimes require an API key. They will tell us how to get one and use it. Responses must be converted from JSON to normal JavaScript objects, which we already have done last time. We can extract the information we want out of the JavaScript objects by analyzing them and making use of console.log. Okay, so that's the end of the lecture. And now I'm going to move on to coding. And I know this lecture took a while, 50 minutes. So the coding portion will definitely be extending into past an hour. And sorry about that. And I'm going to end the lecture with this meme. that I found. This is the Titanic, and yeah. Okay, so a lot of concepts and stuff, lots of terminology and stuff. How is everyone feeling? Are there any questions? Oh, I have some chat. I should check.
I mean, everything was explained super well and concise, so I'm feeling okay. Thank you for the information. I know it was long, but it was very, very useful for me.
Cool, I'm glad. Okay, well, cool. Let's get into writing some code. So I said I would start by making a new project and showing you the actual process of just like getting this project started. So I'll go to GitHub and I'll just make a new project. So actually, I'll show you if you want to follow along in the actual lessons. I'm starting on last week, the fetch API. At the end of the portfolio completion section, there's this OpenAPI project begins. I'm going to be starting here. So we're starting by finding one of these APIs, and then we're going to set up our project, which is basically this part here, and then I'll see how far I get into this current week's lesson. But we're going to start with the assignment that was in the fetch API lesson. So we can get started by looking at some of these APIs. You can check them out. I'm going to go with the cat API, which is listed here. So I'm going to click cat API. Looks cool. So we're going with that. And we want to familiarize ourselves with the documentation and then create a new repository on GitHub. So I'll make a new repository on GitHub and show you how I would do that. I would click on my profile up here. I'd go to your repositories. There's probably different ways to do it. And then I'd click on new, create a new repository. I'm going to call it cat API example 2, because I already made cat API example 1. For me, I'm part of different organizations, so I have to choose owner. I think this will be default to your profile. I'm going to make it public. I'm going to make a README file. You don't have to, but I just like to. Add a git ignore, we don't really need to, and I'll click create repository. So now on GitHub, I have this pretty blank, empty repository. It has one commit by default, the initial commit made by GitHub. And it has this README file, which is pretty much empty. So I'm going to clone this to my computer. You can use HTTPS or SSH. If SSH is giving you a little notification right here saying blah, 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 you don't have like a key gen setup or whatever, just do HTTPS. This is what I usually use anyways. So you copy that URL there, and then you can bring up your terminal. And my terminal is going to look different because I have a special terminal for Mac called iTerm 2, which is just, it's the same as the default terminal, except it's a little different. The top here is going to look a little different than what you're used to, but don't worry about it. So when you're in your terminal, you have to go to the right folder. You have to make sure that you don't just do git clone like right out the gate. You need to make sure, because every terminal instance is going to be in reference to a specific folder in your computer. And so you can see what folder this terminal is in by saying pwd, enter, and that prints the working directory, which is the folder that you're currently in this terminal. So I am currently in users, Ria Redwards, documents, code the dream, assignments, review, cat API example. So I'm in my cat API example project in this terminal. And I don't want to be in that project because if I do a git clone now, I'll be making a new project within this project. So I want to cd ... which goes back one directory, change directory, and then ... means back one. So I'm going back one directory into my assignment review, and this is the folder that I want to be in. And so I'm going to say git clone and then paste that URL. Oh, okay. The URL didn't get copied right. So code, copy, paste, git clone, that URL. So now I just made a copy of this repository, and then I can cd into it. And if I press cd tab, it'll print out the name of all the projects or directories in this current folder. And I can see I have cat API example 2, which I want to go into. So I can say cd, which means change directory, cat API example, and then I want to specify 2. Enter. Oh, I forgot a dash, so I'm going to let it correct me. Okay, so now I'm in cat API example 2, and I can open this with VS Code. There's a few different ways to do it. I have it set up to where I can press code dot, and it'll open VS Code in this repository. I'm not going to do that right now because most of you probably don't have that set up to do that. But what you can do to open a VS Code instance there is, at least on Finder, I don't know exactly how to do it on Windows, but on Finder you can say open dot, and it'll open Finder at this location. So now I have my cat API example 2 folder right here. So this terminal instance just opened a new Finder window in the same location when I said open dot. And now, and you can navigate, you can find this folder in Finder just any way you want. But once you have this folder in Finder, you can go to VS Code, and I can drag this folder into VS Code, but I'm actually going to start a new VS Code window. So file, new window. I'm going to close out my old cat repo. And then I'm going to click and drag this folder into this VS Code instance. And so now this VS Code window is open in that folder. And I'm going to say, yes, I trust the authors. This is basically if you open a folder that has potentially like malicious things in it. I made it, so I trust it. Not going to restart VS Code. And I've been getting this bug where when I say trust the folder, it still doesn't work. And so I usually do a reload the window. I assume that's a me problem. I don't think that that's typical. So now we have a VS Code instance open in this new folder that I made, which is a clone of what I had on GitHub. And the nice thing about doing it that way is now when I open my terminal in VS Code, which if you haven't been using your terminal in VS Code, you should be doing that. It's awesome. You don't have to, but it's nice because when you open this terminal instance, it'll automatically be in the correct folder. As long as your VS Code instance, as long as this folder that's showing up here at the top of your browser or your Explorer, as long as this folder is the correct root folder of your project, this terminal instance will automatically default to the correct location, and then Git will work. The reason I'm emphasizing being in the right location in your terminal and in your VS Code is because if you're in the wrong folder and you're trying to do Git stuff, it will give you tons of bugs, tons of problems, and it's annoying to have to sort out. So make sure when you make a new project, you put it in a new VS Code window, and your terminal, whenever you're doing Git operations, is in the correct folder. And so it is. So now I'm gonna, and you can open the terminal in VS Code. I have it on a hotkey, but you can go up to terminal up here, new terminal. So you can open that. Okay, so we start by making an index.html and index.css. And you could make these in their own folders like we had on the portfolio, but it doesn't really matter. I don't think the assignment requires you to do that. And that's the typical way to do it, for me at least. What I'm used to is just all at the base level like this. So in our index.html, we're going to start with some boilerplate HTML code. And there's a shortcut for that. You can press the exclamation point and then let it autofill. And if you press enter or just click on this, that'll put in all like the default HTML that you would want for pretty much any HTML page, so you don't have to write it yourself. I'm going to title this my cool cat site or something. And then I'm going to open it up with a live server. Before I do that, I want to make sure I might have, okay, yeah, I closed my other VS Code window. So I'm going to open this with live server, and it's going to open my browser with an empty web page. This URL is actually what makes this is what's connecting me to that live server instance. And so I can copy that URL and put it in a different window. So I copied it. I'm just going to do it in this window over here because I already have it set up. Same thing. So I have my live server open. And now if I add some stuff here, if I say like an H1, and I say hello world, we can see it show up there. So that's a good way to test that this is working. Our live server is set up. Let's test that our CSS is connected right. So I can say body, just something random just to see if our CSS is connected. I'll change the background color to red, and you can see it's not working. We didn't see it change the background color, so that means our CSS isn't linked, which makes sense because we didn't add a link tag. So let's do that. Link CSS, and this is another thing that you can type link and then select this to autofill. It's a style sheet. The file is not style.css, it's actually index.css. And that looks terrible, but that does mean that our CSS was linked right. And I'm going to change the background color to just like a dark. And then I can change the color, which will change the font color of everything to like a white. I like dark themes, so we're going with dark theme for this website. Now let's do the JavaScript. So remember, we're going to make this website fetch from the cat API. Actually, how about I start by doing, well, yeah, let's do a hello world in JavaScript. So I'll say console.log hello world. And again, just like the CSS, this is a way to double check that our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all linked together. And the way to link your JavaScript is you do a script tag. The source needs to be the name of the file, index.js. And then I'm going to pull up my developer console or my dev tools here. And we can see it says hello world. So that means our JavaScript is linked right. And another thing I just realized I forgot, I put defer here. And I've explained it twice in my other videos. You can look back on those or look it up why I do that. Cool, so this is our basic setup, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to do a git add -a to add all files. That's similar to if you did git add dot. It's a similar thing. I'm going to do a git commit -m, and I'm going to say initial setup. And I'm just going to do all my work on the main branch. I don't think that's going to be an issue. So I'm just going to say I did that initial setup. I'm going to push my changes. You don't have to, but I want to push to make sure that I'm not getting any errors and that it's properly like linked with the version on GitHub. And so now I can check on GitHub, can reload the page, and here we have our new files showing up here in GitHub. So cool. There's our initial project setup. Now we can do the fetch. So we're going to want to fetch a URL. And the URL is basically our next step is going to be looking at the cat API and determining what URL we want to use to get the information we want from this cat API. So I'm going to go over to the cat API. I'm going to say read our guides. And at the very beginning, and this is where if you're using a different API, you could have a slightly different process, but I'll try to explain my rationale for why I'm doing the things I'm doing so that you can apply it to the API you're using. Here we have click on this link to get a random image. Most APIs will have like a very easy, basic entry point. And so this basic entry point is this URL. And we can click on it and open a new browser tab at that URL. And our browser is doing a GET request to this URL, and we're seeing the data that we get back, which is cool. And so I could actually copy that URL, put it into my fetch as a string. And now our fetch is doing the same thing. And fetch by default does GET requests. So this will be doing the same type of thing as our browser. And if I open the network tab, because of that fetch, I'm going to clear it by pressing this, reload. There's going to be a bunch of excess stuff. Let me make it small. It's going to be a bunch of excess stuff, but somewhere in here is going to be, yeah. I haven't learned why they name these things, the things that they do over here, but this is our request that we just sent to the cat API. We sent a GET request to this URL, and we got this in response. And we didn't do anything with that response because we haven't stored it in a variable. We haven't done .then or anything. So I could do, well, yeah, I'll set up the basic thing, and then we can get back to looking at the documentation for the API. So the syntax for .then is .then, and then we say we get the response. And the response is a parameter inside an arrow function. And then we can say if not response dot okay, or throw new error. Throw new error. And this is basically the same thing that we did in last week's assignment. This is like the basic syntax for doing fetch with some asynchronous stuff with the .thens. So we're throwing an error if it's not okay. We're going to want to say return res.json, which is going to parse it from JSON into regular JavaScript. And then down here, we're going to do another .then with a parameter that's data, and then another arrow function. And I'm going to let prettier, which prettier is my extension. If you go to extensions, prettier, and I talk about this in my lecture on being efficient or being fast at using your computer or something. For some reason, it's not loading my extensions, but you can go back and look at how to set up prettier because it formats your code and makes it look good, and it's good. Okay, so we have .then data, and then this data is actually what we want. And so I'm just going to start by console logging the data. And then we need to finish off with a catch. We're going to catch any errors. And then in here, we could just say console.warn. You might see different people handling the error in different ways. Oh, ERR. So that's what we're just going to do with the error. If we get an error, we're just going to say a console.warn, which is similar to console.log. It just shows up as a different color and stuff. So now we can see this console.log data is actually showing up right here. And one way you can verify that is over here. You can see index.js:9. That means this console log came from the 9th line of our index.js file. So if I go to our index.js file here, and I look at the 9th line, this console.log, that's verifying that data is what's showing up right here. And this is what I was talking about, how different browsers might show your data differently. In Chrome, it's hiding most of this data, and it's only showing kind of the outside of it. And then we can like use these little arrows to kind of expand the contents of this response. So the data we have is an array. And you can see because we have these square brackets on the outside, it's an array with an object inside. The array actually only has one index. It only has one value in it. And if there were more, I would have this 0 here, but then I'd have more. So this 0 is an index, and I only have this one index. So this is an array with one item. The item is an object. The object has these properties. One of those properties is a URL. And I could actually use, this is like kind of the fundamental part of parsing that data and figuring out what you want out of it. So because the outer part of it is an array, I would want to do data at, I'd use the array syntax to access an element of the array. And since there's only one, we could just do data at 0. It doesn't really matter, but we're going to access the first element of this array. And now the first element of the array, we can actually, if I save again and it console logged that, we can see what that would be. So now we're console logging data at 0. So the array of data at the first index, or the 0 index, which is an object, you can see, with these properties. And I can expand that, 2 different views. It has a property called URL, which we want. So .url. And now we're getting the actual URL. So we've basically gotten this data. We've decided we wanted to go to the first element of this data array and get the URL property from the object. And that URL, if I click on that, it'll show us a cat. So now this response is okay, but we're only getting a single cat URL. We're not getting any of the other information that I would like to have. I would like to get the breed information, because on my original example, I got the breed information and some other interesting stuff. And so for that, we need an API key. You can see, copy this link, add your own API key to get 10 Bengal cat images. So if I click on that, it'll show me I'm getting more Bengal cat images. And they have this replace me as the API key. I actually want to make one. And I actually already made one. And so I'm not going to show you how to make an API key. Well, I'll show you the beginnings of it. You click on authentication. You need an API key. If you don't have one, just sign up on main site. So I'm going to click on main site. Get your API key. It's free to sign up. It looks like you're paying for something, but you're actually not. It's just, if you want pro, you're paying for something, but we don't need a pro membership to the cat API unless you really want it. Get free access, you enter your email. They want to know a description of your app. So you could say like practice project. You're using it for a personal project or a school university project or whatever. And then they'll send you an email. And so in my email, I don't remember if it took any time or not, but and some APIs you use will not require you to use a key. But I got an email from them that had my key. And my key was, let's see, I think I have it in my other project. So I'm going to go to VS Code. I'm going to open my old CAD example project.
Hey, Rio, do you have to make your own API key?
So with the cat API, I'd say technically not. With most of these APIs, technically not. It's just the only thing really you can get with the cat API if you don't have an API key is a single image of a cat, and it's randomized. So if I go to the guide, click on this link to get a random image, or click on this link to get 10 random images. These URLs, these are working fine without an API key, but most of the information that you're going to get is only if you have an API key. So this is without an API key. We get a URL, we get an ID, which is the ID of the cat in their system, which doesn't really mean anything to us. You have the width and the height, which is the width and the height of this image. And as per the assignment, and actually, I'm going to go back to this assignment and say, we did these steps. We made the basic website. We repeated the portfolio assignment with the fetch and made sure you're getting a response. We looked a little bit at the API docs. Let's see. Oh, add the project repository in the README file. Yeah, I didn't even see that one. So I would want to probably copy this API key. But anyways, getting back to your question, we're going to go back to the new thing, the lesson for this week. If you go to the OpenAPI project, one of the requirements is, what does it say? Oh, maybe it's specified in the last one, but we actually have to display two data points from the API. So build your second fetch for your second data point. So basically it means we want to be fetching different information. And I think without the API key on the cat API, I don't know if we're going to be able to get all the information we would want.
Got it. Okay.
So
Thank you.
yeah, I'm going to say for the cat API, I would get an API key. For the other APIs, you might not need one. But anyways, so we're getting this URL, which is great, but because of the assignment wanting us to do actually something a little more interesting, we're going to put our API key in there. And it'll give us more information. And so I'm going to use a query parameter. And it actually tells us, you can see on the documentation here, how they do the API key. So they have this URL with the API key. And everything about the URL up until here is the same as this URL right here. And then we have a question mark limit equals 10. So that, and if once we read more, we can see limit can be 1 to 100. So these are the different query parameters. And you can only use them if you have a valid API key. And so we want, if we want to be able to get a certain number of cats, we can use the limit query, which in this table, they show us what it would look like. But we actually have to translate it to a query parameter, which the syntax is question mark, limit, or page, or order, and then one of these values, which they specify here. So limit equals 10, and then this is a kind of annoying thing. Every consecutive query parameter would need an ampersand instead of a question mark. So the first, if we only have one, you just need a question mark, or the first one needs a question mark. And then the name of the key, and then the name of the key equals value. And then every consecutive query parameter, we say an ampersand and then the key value. So we have limit equals 10 to get 10 cats. breed underscore IDs equals BENG. I assume that stands for Bengal, or maybe that's a cat. I don't know anything about cat breeds. And then the ampersand is how we are separating the rest of the query parameters. So the ampersand API underscore key equals replace me. So I just looked at this and I said, okay, well, if I want a certain number of cats, if I want to put my API key in there, I have to basically look at this URL and see how they did it. So I could actually take this one here and I could say, I'm just going to put my API key at the end. So I have images, search, and I can say question mark API underscore key equals, and then I'm going to paste the API key that I got back from that email, which I have that in my email, but I also stored it in this project here. So this whole part, that's my API key. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to say API key equals, and then that long thing. And looks like I'm not getting anything different because I'm still just using the same URL to fetch one cat. But if I were to do a limit, and so I could do as another query parameter in here, I could say, and I can zoom in, or shoot, looks like I can only zoom in on the website, not the actual URL here. I apologize if this is hard to see, but what I'm typing is, I'm going to say limit equals 5. And I'm going to say ampersand for the next query parameter, which is API key. And I'm going to see if that works. Okay, it's given us a lot. I'm not sure. This is definitely more than 5 cats. Let's see. There might be a certain order you have to put these in. I'll just try copying this one. And then replacing the API key with replace me. So I replaced it with my API key, and now you can see we're getting a bunch more information. And what it still is it's an array of objects, and each object is a cat or a bunch of information about a specific cat, and it has an image, a list of breed information, the URL, which is the image, the breeds property has a bunch more information. Breeds is actually an array, we can see. And in this case, the breeds array only has one object in it. And you could imagine if the cat had multiple breeds, if it was like 2 different breeds in the image, then they might have the breeds have multiple objects with the breed information. And each object in this breeds array is actually information about the breed. So we can see name equals Bengal. Description, Bengals are a lot of fun to live with, but they're definitely not the cat for everyone, blah, blah, blah. So we're getting more information because we have this API key. And forming this URLs is honestly a bit of a pain and can be confusing. And so definitely try to look for examples that they have on their site to make it easier for you. And if you're using another API, they might have like things in there to help you get to the URL and the data you want. Like if I were to use the Star Wars API, Swappy, you can see they have the base URL, and then you can do /people/1, and this is the response. If I were to say /people/2, it would give me a different person probably. So this person is C3PO. If I were to do back to person 1, Luke Skywalker. So these are that's the person, that's the ID. The reason I know that I could change this one here to a different number and get a different person is because all these APIs are following the REST convention. And if you know a little bit about how the REST APIs are structured, then you can usually infer that. But it says, need a hint, try people 1, planets 3, starship 9. So I could click on one of those. Oh, maybe I can't click on it. Maybe I have to just copy it. Oh, no, I can click on it. Okay, so API/planets3. So this is basically helping you construct a URL to get to the actual data that you want. And at the end of the day, the data is going to be a big mess, and it's going to be a little bit, of a challenge potentially to make sure that your URL is working right and they're getting the information you want. It looks like this API has lots of cool, interesting information with these 3 endpoints without needing an API key. So this could be that could be a cool one to like use for your site if you want. Every API is going to be a little different. And for me, using the cat API, in all honesty, like setting this presentation up together yesterday, it was a little bit like confusing trying to work this API, in all honesty. And so don't worry if you need to like reach out to someone to help or just use one of these example URLs that they provide. Anyways, back to the code. So we got this URL. I just use this one and I just put replace me. I replaced that with the API key I got back from them. And I put it up here and it gave me all this information. I don't actually want 10 cats. I just want to show 1 cat at a time. So where it says limit 10, I'm going to see if I replace that with 1, if it'll just give me 1 cat. Yep. Okay, so now we're just getting 1 cat. If I scroll down, I can see I'm only getting 1 cat. And remember, this is all easier for me because I have this extension JSON Lite. And if I turn it off, this is what the information is going to look like. And it's just going to be hard. It's going to be really hard to make sense of any of that. You can do pretty print, and that can help. But another way to do it is if I didn't have this, if I didn't have the extension or pretty print or anything, I could copy this, which again, this is the response back. This is the JSON object from the API. I could copy that. Totally unformatted, looks confusing. And because I have prettier, if I made a new JSON file, like test, or I could call it response.json, you can make a new JSON file. And because I have prettier, I can have prettier format this for me. So I just pasted it and then I saved it. And now because it's a JSON file, prettier knows how to format this information. That's another way to do it. There's lots of ways to make sense of this data we got back. But anyways, now we have a URL that's giving us a little bit more interesting information. Let me make sure I'm in the correct one we're working. So I'm on this one. So let's try this new URL and see what we get back. So this URL now has a little bit more interesting information. We're saying limit to 10. Actually, I want to limit to 1. Breed IDs equals Bengal. Oh, that's saying I only want cats that are Bengal. I think I want to get rid of that. If I remember right, when I was looking through this, there's a way to verify that a cat has breeds. So only return images that have breed information. So some images you get back might not have breed information, and I want the breed information. So I'm going to say has breeds equals 1. I assume that means it does have breeds. So I could say limit to 1. instead of breed IDs, I'm going to do has breeds. And the value of that is going to be 1, which is going to say I want to limit my the response I get back. I want to limit it to 1 cat, and the has breeds property should be 1, which means it'll only give me cats that have breed information. And we'll see if that works. I'm going to go back down to this console log the data, comment that out. So we can see this data, and let's just make sure this is a cat object that has breed information. Yep. So this breeds array is there, present, and it's giving us information. And so if I didn't have this has breeds here, has breeds equals 1, or if I set it to has breeds equals 0, it's possible that our response might not have breed information. Yeah, you can see breeds is now an empty array. If I set this to 1, breeds now has data. So it's only going to fetch cat images that have breed information. And so now I'm getting that information that I want in this fetch. Let's figure out what we want to display. So we want to start by displaying an image to the DOM, which can be accessed via cat square brackets 0, which means, or data, and then we're data as an array with an object in it. The object has a property called URL, which is the actual cat URL, or the cat image URL. So this is the information we want. And so I'm going to say like const URL, or like cat image URL equals that data as 0.url. And so now that I have this URL, I want to put that into an image element and put it into our DOM. So I'm going to go to our index.html. I'm going to create a new container to put this image into, and I'm going to call it ID cat container. So we're going to load this cat image into our cat container. And so I'm going to use the DOM selector to get that new div right here. I'm going to use a DOM selector to get that by ID of cat container. So I'm going to say const cat container equals document dot, and we could use query selector or get element by ID. I'm going to use get element by ID. Does the same thing, except get element by ID is specifically only for getting something by its ID. Query selector can get something by ID or class name or HTML tag name or whatever. So we're just going to use get element by ID. We're going to get our cat container. I'm going to console log the cat container to make sure that we are actually getting it, which I would recommend anytime you're doing a DOM selector, always console log the result to make sure that it's something. And it is. We can see we're getting back this div that has an ID of cat container. Looks slightly different there than. Sometimes this looks like an HTML element, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know. But it's not null. If we change this to like cat containers, now you'd see null showing up, which means cat container is not the object we wanted it to be. We want cat container to be that HTML element. So if you see null, when you console log whatever you got back from document.getElement by ID or document.querySelector, if you see null, that means that the variable you got wasn't actually valid. So we need to change this selector to make sure that we're getting the thing. Okay. So now that we have this cat container, let's load an image into it. So we have this cat image URL. We want to make a new image. So let's say const cat image equals document.create element. Sorry, I have my IntelliSense showing up everywhere. Document.create element, and we could say image. So we're creating a cat image, or we're creating an image element and storing it in a variable called cat image. And now I want to set the source of that image. So imagine we were doing a new image tag. You have to set the source. We could do the alt too, but let's not worry about that. We want to set the source to some URL. And so in this case, we're making this in JavaScript. We're creating this image element and we're going to set the source. So cat image.src is how you can set that property. And we're going to set it to the cat image URL, which is what we got back from the API. And now this cat image should be an HTML element that has the source of the correct URL to get that cat image. Basically, we should be getting a cat image showing up in the DOM as long as we put this new element that we just made into the DOM. And we need to put it into the cat container, because we just made that cat container element to contain the cat information. So cat container, we can use append child, cat image. And look at that. Here's our cat. So this showed up from the API. So our website sent a fetch request to the cat API, got a bunch of information. One of the pieces of information was a cat URL, or URL to a cat image. And we loaded that URL into an HTML element that's a source, or that's an image tag. We set the source to be that URL, and then we put that URL, or we put that image into the DOM. And if we were to go to our elements here, you could see we have this cat container, and in our cat container, we have an image, and we had set the source of that image to this URL that has that cat image. So that's the beginning of it. I'm gonna say, that's a success. So we could do a git add and then git commit, and we could say fetching cat images and loading them into the DOM. Okay, so now we went through, we had that cat image URL all along, but we went through that trouble to get the API key and put that in there and like change this query and stuff. So let's get some information about the cat breeds. So this should have information, what we get back from the API. We should be getting the image and then information about what breed this cat is in this image. And we can go back to this console log data here. We're still console logging the data we got back from the API. And so I'm gonna bring up my console and I'm gonna look at what this data is. So remember, it's an array, it has a URL property, and then it also has this breeds. So we want to get the breed information. So instead of saying .url, let's do .breeds. So here, we still want to get the URL to store the URL here, but we also want to get the breed. So maybe we could do it just all the way down here. We could say, and let's just do another console log. We could say console.log data at 0 dot, and instead of URL, we're doing .breeds. And let's see what that comes back with. So remember, our first console log is right here, console log data, which would be right here. Our second one is right here, and you can actually see the line numbers over here. So this second thing we're console logging is the breeds array. The breeds is an array with one element at index 0. I don't really care if the cat has multiple breeds. I don't really feel like going through the trouble to display all the breeds. So I'm just going to say we're going to get the first breed. Most cats in here only have one breed anyways. So Now we're console logging the first element of that breeds array. And here we're actually at an object now. This object is going to have information about the cat breed. And one of the pieces of information is the name, Siberian. So that's the actual name of the cat breed. So we could do breeds.name. And there we go. Oh, and also just a side note, this API is going to give us a different random cat every time because that's what this specific URL does. They have it set up to give us different random cats. So every time we're doing a fetch request, we're going to get a random cat, which is just fun and cool. So here you can see our breed is showing up and it's changing every time we fetch a new cat. Norwegian forest cat. So this is the name of the breed. And we access that by saying data 0.breeds 0.name. And again, that's going to be one of the hard parts, is making sense of all that data you get back and being able to access the properties that you want in it. But it all comes down to knowing how arrays work and knowing how objects work and knowing how to kind of access arrays and objects to get the information you want. So we're getting the name of the breed, which is awesome. Let's load the name of the breed into the DOM, just in the same way that we did the image. So I could say const breed name equals, and let's do document.create element. Let's do an h2. And then I could say, remember, this is an empty h2, so I need to fill it with the cat name. And I can actually, I'll store that in a variable right here. So const cat name, or wait. It would be breed name, except I already have this breed name variable right here. So let's call this breed. How would I just call this cat breed title or something? So this is the HTML element. I'm calling it cat breed title. Here, I'm going to call this variable breed name. And then breed name is going to be set to this whole thing. And now if we do cat breed title, and we say we want the inner text of that to be the breed name, that should make an h2 where the text of it is the breed name. And then we want to load that into the DOM. And we do that the same way, cat container.append child. So I can just copy that. And I'm going to put that one down here and say, instead of appending the cat image, I'm going to append the cat breed title into our DOM. And look at that. It's working. So this is this new cat breed that we just put in there, which is great. I kind of want the breed to appear above the image. And so I can do that by just taking this thing where we append the image. I'm going to push that down to the very bottom here so that we're going to append the title and then append the image. And remember, append says put something at the end. So we're going to put the title at the end, and then we're going to put the image at the end. Because we're putting the image at the end last, it's going to appear at the bottom. So now our title is going to be at the top. Now, these cat images are kind of giant. I'm going to do a really quick CSS fix. I'm just going to say image max width of maybe like 20 rem. Let's see. It's a little small. Probably make it a little bigger. 30. Rem, as a side note, rem is it's a unit in CSS. It's kind of like pixels, except for rems are a lot bigger than pixels. What they really are is they're the size of the root elements text size or font size. So it's like the default font size for your website, which by default websites have a font size of, I think, 16. So your root font size is going to be 16. And so this would be 30 times 16 pixels. It's a little weird to get used to, but if I were to do like 1 rem, that would be 16 pixels. If I were to do 30 rem, that's 30 times 16 pixels. It's a multiple of your base font size, and you can change your base font size if you do. Let's see, colon root font size 20 pixels, and that would actually change all the things that are sized by rem. So you can see our image gets bigger, even though we just changed our root font size. Side note, I like using rems. That's what I'm going to be using. Okay, so now our cats are a little bit smaller, which is good because they were way too big for the page. So there's kind of, let's see, let's get the cat description really quick. So in the same way that we just got the cat image, we got the breed name, let's get the breed description and load it into the DOM. And that's just a slight change from what we've been doing. Or it's the same like pattern that we've already done twice now to get the image and then the cat breed name. So I'm going to console log data breeds at 0. And here, this is the breeds object, which has the name. And it also has a description, which I think would be fun. So let's get the description too. Dot description. And again, we're going to load this into the DOM. Same process, const breed description equals document.create element. And I'll just create a P tag. And then I'll load this with, we actually don't need to store, I'll show you a slightly different way. We don't need to store data at blah, 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 to blah, 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 blah. We don't need to store that in its own variable. So I could just say, for this one, I'll just say breed description equals that. And then I'll say cat container. I'll move all these things where I append the cat container or append elements into the cat container. I'll put those all at the bottom. And then I'll say cat container dot append child breed description. And I assume that should work. Not seeing anything. Let's see. Definitely did something wrong. Okay, const breed description, document.create element, P, breed description. Okay, I'm gonna try commenting out lines until this starts working. Okay, so there's something weird about that line. Oh, okay. I'm setting breed description, the HTML element, to this value. I need to set the inner text of it. That's what I forgot. Okay. So now we are getting the cat breed name, the cat breed description, and an image of the cat. And that's good for now. I think that's plenty of interesting data from the cat API. And let's change this text from hello world to cats. And then, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I'm getting a call and I'm gonna have to text this person really quick. So give me 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Cool. So we got the cats. Pretty much everything is all done. I'll do a git commit, and then there's one last thing which I want to fetch the cats using a button instead of just by reloading the page. So that's the last step that I'm going to do. So I'm going to do git add a, git commit -m. So the last one was fetching cats images and loading them into the DOM. This is fetch cats breed name and breed description and loading into the DOM. So that's cool. And yeah, so the next step, the kind of last thing, and because this project is kind of open-ended, I'm not saying this is like necessarily the only way to do this, or the specific way that they want, but this is just what I would like is I want a button and I want to be able to fetch cats using it. So I'm going to say fetch cat. So the button is going to be called fetch cat, and we can just put, that's the ID. I'm going to put the text fetch cat in the button. So now when I click that button, I want it to fetch a cat. For right now, it's not going to do anything, but using JavaScript, I'm going to select that button. I'm going to say const fetch cat button equals document.getElementById fetch cat. I'm going to console.log it to make sure that we selected it. Yep, we have our button. And now when I click that button, I want to do all this stuff. So everything in here, I want to have happen when I click the button. And so the way to do that is I'm going to say fetch cat button dot add event listener. So I'm going to, this add event listener says, when something happens, I want to run some code. The thing that I want to have happen is I want to run some code when someone clicks the button. So the first parameter is click. And then the second parameter is an arrow function. And this arrow function in the body is where we can say the information or the code for fetching a cat. So I could just copy and paste this all in there. So I moved this entire bit of code for fetching the cat into this arrow function for the event listener. So now when I click the button, it'll fetch a cat. And we can see that here, fetch cat, and it fetches a cat. Now, one problem is when I click it again, it won't delete the other elements that are already in the DOM. It'll just load a new cat in, and that's fine. We could keep it that way. But to make it more similar to my original example, I'm going to clear the contents of the cat container before I do the new fetch. So I'm going to do cat container dot inner HTML equals an empty string. So that clears out the contents, clear out the previous cat from the DOM. So now every time I click that, it'll fetch a cat and then clear it and fetch a new one. Okay, I know that was a ton. There's a lot, like usual, but probably gonna stop there and yeah, wrap it up. How is everyone feeling? Good, bad? Is it making sense? Any questions?
Good.
Super thorough. I love it. Thank you.
Can you scroll to the top, Rio, of your code?
Yep.
Thanks.
And again, I'll probably, I'll put this on Replit so that you can see it there. And I'd say if you want to know like what parts you want to change for using a different API, you're going to want to keep the, so you're going to want to change the URL in the fetch. You're still going to want .then. All this is going to be the same. All of these lines right here are going to be the same no matter what API you use. This .then, this is where you're going to have the code that's specific to the different API, because this is where we're taking the data that we get and doing something different with it. And the data that we get is going to look different from one API to the next. So you're going to want to console log the data. Look at what it looks like in your console, or look at it in your browser, like this, like that. Check out what it looks like, figure out what information you want, and then use array indexes, and the dot syntax for selecting different properties. And then you're going to want to load those properties into new DOM elements, and then load the DOM elements into the DOM. And for every API, you might be getting slightly different information, and the data might look a little bit different, but it's going to be the same, where you figure out a URL that works for you, find out how to drill into that data and get the information you want, and then put it into DOM elements, and then load the DOM elements into the DOM. That's the basic idea of interacting with an API, getting information from it.
Thank you, Rio. Your time
Yep.
is so appreciated.
I'm glad. Yeah, this one was a long one again, but I appreciate you all sticking with me. And yeah, feel free to reach out on Slack if any of you have questions. And I'll be posting the recording and posting this code on Replit so you all can see.
Thanks,
Okay.
Rio.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Rio,
Good luck,
do
y'all.
you have a time to answer a question, or do you have to go?
Yeah, I could answer a question.
Okay. So it's not loading for me. I'm not sure why. Like on
Okay.
my live version of Visual Studio Code. And I
Okay.
think, yeah.
Well, I can stop screen sharing, and if you want, you could screen share and you can check it out.
Okay, thanks. Wait, hold on. Let me try to get both on the screen. And I'm pretty confident the code works. I just don't know why I don't understand the error I'm getting.
Okay. The resource from, so that's your live server
Okay.
was blocked. Okay, so that's your JavaScript file. It was blocked due to MIME type, text HTML mismatch, content type options. So MIME type is your like different files. There's different file extensions, like PDF and HTML, image, all those different file extensions, JPEG, those are MIME types. So it has something to do with a file type mismatch, X content type. Unless that's not the error. Unless that's an unrelated error.
I canceled it out and it's in the HTML.
Oh, your
think.
HTML is having some problems. So you can see you have those bottom two HTML elements look a little different.
Right.
That's the syntax highlighting. So your image tag, you forgot to close the quote.
Is that gonna fix it? Not quite.
That fixed that.
Yeah.
And one way to sometimes find problems is in your problems tab in your VS Code. So down by your terminal, there's a little tab called problems, and that would have shown you that HTML error. Okay, so nothing in there, which is fine. Let's see, your GET request. It looks like your JavaScript file isn't.
So one more error in the image tag, like mm, before the tag, you have to put backslash after
Um, what was that again?
the slash.
The slash, oh, to close the image tag. I think image tags, I can't remember, I'll have to look it up. I think image tags might be image tag HTML. They might just close without needing that. Yeah, they do. So you don't need that. What I'm seeing though is your script tag, your source for that is js/index.js. That's assuming you have a folder that your JavaScript is in. So I'd save that, and that should help at least with some of these errors.
Yeah, because for some reason it had it like that, and I fixed it, and
Yeah.
so I think that is helpful.
And that's one of the reasons why I generally do the hello world for my HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to make sure that like I do some sort of thing in each of those files to make sure that I can like see that they're all linked correctly. So now we know they're all linked. Let's see what you have. Okay, so you're doing a GET request to some URL on that image tag. So that's going to be giving you that top error is that image tag. So you can actually delete that. We're creating that image tag using JavaScript at some point.
So delete the whole.
Yeah. And okay, fetch cat button is null. So that's another thing where you were using a DOM selector to try to get an element, but the element is not in existence. It doesn't exist. And so that's, you can fix that by, we need to create a button to fetch the cats in your HTML. And I just created mine like above that cat container.
Okay.
If you do it below, then when you fetch a cat, the button's going to get moved down to below where all the cat stuff is rendered, and that's going to be it's going to be hard to click it again. It's going to be bouncing around. So yeah, create a button tag.
I think what's the tag for button?
It's just called button.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And you want a closing tag for that too.
Oh. Yeah. Okay.
And then you could put like fetch cats as the text that displays in there. Or just singular, I'd say. Because we're just fetching one cat. And then if you want, you can give that button an ID. You don't have to. If you give it an ID, we can select it by ID. So you could say like fetch cat button or just fetch cat. Yeah. And copy that ID because we're going to need that in our JavaScript.
Okay.
And copying and pasting is a great way to make sure that we're getting the exact right value we need. So you got that ID. So now where it says get element by ID, fetch cat on your line 2, replace that string at the end there. Replace that with what you just copied. Because that's where we're saying get the element in the DOM that has the value or the ID of fetch. Yep.
Okay.
So we're saying whatever element that's in our HTML that has that ID, we want to get it.
Okay.
Okay, so now you can see in your console, you're getting,
The
it's
description.
displaying a cat, some cat information. It's displaying the cat name, which is good. That means our fetch is working right. What you want to do now is, let's see. The image doesn't seem to be loading, but that could be because of your CSS. It's possible. No. Let's see. Let's go back to your JavaScript and let's see. So cat image URL equals data at 0.url. Cat image equals document.create element image. Cat URL or cat image URL dot source equals cat image. I think that needs to be cat image dot source equals cat image URL.
Wait, say that one more time.
So that first variable should be cat image, and then the second one should be cat image URL. Yep, like that.
Okay. Oh,
Hey,
did it.
good job.
Yeah.
Cats.
Yeah.
Cats for free. All the time.
Yeah.
So now anytime any of you make an app and you want a button to display cats randomly, you can just add that.
Thanks, Rio.
Get random cat data. It's interesting. It's fun. I thought about making an app that I was like learning APIs. I was thinking it would be fun to make one that automatically sends texts to people with cat pictures. Because there's like an API for sending text to people. So I could use the cat API to fetch a cat image and then send a text. It's a cat image. Just a random idea project on my bucket list. Anyways, okay. Good job, y'all.
Thank
I'll
you.
see you next time. Okay, bye.